US President Donald Trump has made a short 10-minute televised address to the nation to defend his decision to push for a wall on the Mexican border. In his first televised address, the president did not make any mention of declaring a national emergency. However, he said that illegal migrants, who he kept referring to as illegal aliens, are spreading crime. He said that barriers were critical for border security and that building the wall for the same was pure common sense. He highlighted the increase in crime rates by illegal migrants and said that America needed a passive bill to end the crisis. The Democrats were quick to respond, saying that Trump should stop holding America hostage over the border wall and should end the shutdown now. Let's listen in to a short excerpt from that televised speech of Donald Trump.
Customs and Border Patrol agents encounter thousands of illegal immigrants trying to enter our country. We are out of space to hold them, and we have no way to promptly return them back home to their country. America proudly welcomes millions of lawful immigrants who enrich our society and contribute to our nation. But all Americans are hurt by uncontrolled illegal migration. It strains public resources and drives down jobs and wages. Among those hardest hit are African Americans and Hispanic Americans. Our southern border is a pipeline for vast quantities of illegal drugs, including meth, heroin, cocaine, and fentanyl. Every week, 300 of our citizens are killed by heroin alone, 90% of which floods across from our southern border. More Americans will die from drugs this year than were killed in the entire Vietnam War. In the last 2 years, ICE officers made 266,000 arrests of aliens with criminal records, including those charged or convicted of 100,000 assaults, 30,000 sex crimes, and 4,000 violent killings. Over the years, thousands of Americans have been brutally killed by those who illegally entered our country, and thousands more lives will be lost if we don't act right now. This is a humanitarian crisis, a crisis of the heart and a crisis of the soul. Last month, 20,000 migrant children were illegally brought into the United States, a dramatic increase. These children are used as human pawns by vicious coyotes and ruthless gangs. 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted on the dangerous trek up through Mexico. Women and children are the biggest victims, by far, of our broken system. This is the tragic reality of illegal immigration on our southern border. This is the cycle of human suffering that I am determined to end.
To bring us more details on this news story, I'm joined in by our correspondent Will Denslow, who joins me live from New York. Let's quickly go across to Will. Will, very good morning to you. That's what the timing is here in India. We just heard what Donald Trump had to say right now. Considering he has not declared a national emergency, do you think he is willing to concede or draw concessions for the Democrats in a way?
Well, in a phrase, absolutely not. Now, President Trump did say that he was hosting congressional leaders the next day in the United States, so in about 18 hours' time or so, that he says that in just a 45-minute meeting, the wall could be funded and the US government could be back open. So in some ways, you could regard that as an opportunity for Democrats. But of course, we've heard from senior Democrats, Nancy Pelosi as well as Chuck Schumer, speaking in an immediate rebuttal after the president's address, where they said absolutely not. The Democrats will still not change their position on funding the wall. So both sides have spoken their piece on primetime US television, and neither side show that they're willing to compromise even an inch.
Right. As you rightly mentioned, that neither sides show that they are not willing to compromise. Also brings me to the point that it is going to be the 19th day of the U.S. shutdown. What sort of global impact do you see?
Well, in terms of the financial elements. S&P estimate that it's costing the US economy around $1.2 billion every week the US government remains closed. Of course, 800,000 or so federal workers are impacted by the shutdown. Now, the Democrats were keen to point out that paychecks are due, and things like small businesses, things like farmers that are waiting for federal loans are struggling to get them, and there are potentially huge ramifications for people across the United States. Now, the Democrats in their address, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, said that they are willing, what they want to see is a separation between the two issues of funding, of ending this government shutdown and addressing the issue of the border wall. They say they want to see the government open first, then they're more than willing to address the issue of border security. But from President Trump, the issue is very simple. He wants to see both of those two things remaining completely together. He believes that it is still a matter of national security, and he wants this funding for the border wall immediately.
Right. Also, well, how do you analyze the Democrats' rebuttal at the moment? Because they clearly made it, they referred to this as a digression from the real crisis within the Trump administration when they referred to the Trump speech.
Essentially, Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, has previously described the idea of a border wall as immoral. And I think Chuck Schumer really summed up the Democrats' position on the matter when he came out and said that he wants the United States to be thought of for the structure of the Statue of Liberty, not a 30-foot wall on the southern border. So that really shows the issue and the stance that the Democrats are taking. Of course, they have in the past offered to put forward $1.3 billion when it comes to border security. Now, this would include things like improved fencing when it comes to when it comes to the southern border. They want to see improved technology when it comes to the ports of entry and to stop illegal immigrants. So they're not against the issue of stronger measures taken on the southern border. But what the Democrats are saying is they're against the idea of a border wall. They believe that it's not the most effective way to secure a strong border. But as far as the US gridlock is concerned, President Trump is adamant that the wall is the best way to go forward. He, in his speech, in his address, he cited law enforcement officials working on the southern border who he says agree with him on this point, that the wall is the way to go forward and is the only way, in his mind, to protect US citizens. And he said that he was sworn in to do that very job.
Right. Will, on a last note, families and children seeking asylum at the border wall, they are increasing at an alarming, overwhelming rate. Do you actually think that it's an issue of national security, or is it actually a humanitarian crisis?
Well, President Trump said in a tweet over the weekend that this address would be to discuss what he describes as both a humanitarian crisis and a crisis when it comes to national security. He did mention in his address that he wanted to see more funding go towards beds when it comes to the migrants crossing over. He said that it's women and children that are impacted worst, that have been turned away at the border, and they're the ones that are most vulnerable, stating that women are raped on the way up to the US border in these caravans at an alarming rate as far as the president is concerned. But of course, Democrats were keen to point out that the tough, stringent measures in place by the Trump administration, in their minds, have exacerbated the suffering on the border. So there's really seen this impasse that both sides very much regard this as a humanitarian crisis. President Trump says that a stronger wall will essentially deter people from fleeing their countries, making it to the United States. That will solve the humanitarian crisis. But as far as the Democrats are concerned, they believe that people will be making this trip to the United States anyway, fleeing violence and persecution in their countries, largely from Central America. They'll be making this trip anyway. What the Democrats want to see is a more orderly processing environment when they do reach the border. So both sides see it as a humanitarian issue, but coming from it from very different angles altogether.
Absolutely, coming in from very different angles altogether, because if it was a humanitarian crisis, we wouldn't have seen the 19th day of the US shutdown. And taking Trump's speech into consideration, which has, of course, met a very assertive rebuttal from the Democrats. On that note, Will, let's also listen into what the Democrats had to say, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. This is what they had to actually say.
Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to speak directly to the American people tonight about how we can end this shutdown and meet the needs of the American people. Sadly, much of what we heard from President Trump throughout this senseless shutdown has been full of misinformation and even malice. The president has chosen fear. We want to start with the facts. The fact is, on the very first day of this Congress, House Democrats passed Senate Republican legislation to reopen government and fund smart, effective border security solutions. But the president is rejecting these bipartisan bills which would reopen government over his obsession with forcing American taxpayers to waste billions of dollars on an expensive and ineffective wall, a wall he always promised Mexico would pay for. The fact is, President Trump has chosen to hold hostage critical services for the health, safety, and well-being of the American people and withhold the paychecks of 800,000 innocent workers across the nation, many of them veterans. He promised to keep government shut down for months or years, no matter whom it hurts. That's just plain wrong. The fact is, we all agree we need to secure our borders while honoring our values. We can build the infrastructure and roads at our ports of entry. We can install new technology to scan cars and trucks for drugs coming into our nation. We can hire the personnel we need to facilitate trade and immigration at the border. We can fund more innovation to detect unauthorized crossings. The fact is, the women and children at the border are not a security threat. They are a humanitarian challenge, a challenge that President Trump's own cruel and counterproductive policies have only deepened. And the fact is, President Trump must stop holding the American people hostage, must stop manufacturing a crisis, and must reopen the government. Thank you. Leader Schumer?
Thank you, Speaker Pelosi. My fellow Americans, we address you tonight for one reason only. The President of the United States, having failed to get Mexico to pay for his ineffective, unnecessary border wall, and unable to convince the Congress or the American people to foot the bill, has shut down the government. American democracy doesn't work that way. We don't govern by temper tantrum. No president should pound the table and demand he gets his way, or else the government shuts down, hurting millions of Americans who are treated as leverage. Tonight, and throughout this debate and throughout his presidency, President Trump has appealed to fear, not facts, division, not unity. Make no mistake, Democrats and the president both want stronger border security. However, we sharply disagree with the president about the most effective way to do it. So, how do we untangle this mess? Well, there's an obvious solution. Separate the shutdown from arguments over border security. There is bipartisan legislation supported by Democrats and Republicans to reopen government while allowing debate over border security to continue. There is no excuse for hurting millions of Americans over a policy difference. Federal workers are about to miss a paycheck. Some families can't get a mortgage to buy a new home. Farmers and small businesses won't get loans they desperately need. Most presidents have used Oval Office addresses for noble purposes. This president just used the backdrop of the Oval Office to manufacture a crisis, stoke fear, and divert attention from the turmoil in his administration.
You just heard Democrats Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer rebutting the U.S. President's address over there in the Oval Office. Let me go back to Will Denslow, who's joining me live from New York. Will, your closing thoughts on this rebuttal that we just heard. My observations, let me share with you. They clearly made it seem like it's a manufactured crisis by Donald Trump, that Donald Trump is holding people hostage. They also very smartly referred to the bipartisan legislation which has opened the debate to the Republican Party and the Democrats. Also referred to Trump's campaign promise of getting the Mexico wall built by Mexico. How do you take this rebuttal now?
Yeah, essentially, I think Chuck Schumer really summed up the Democrats' position, where he said that he wanted to see the US remembered, or the US known for the Statue of Liberty, of course, a symbol of welcoming refugees and migrants from around the world into their country with open arms, and not a 30-foot wall that the president is envisaging. Of course, the president, for his part, says that with a huge border wall and with this funding of over $5 billion, the United States and its citizens will not only be safer, they'll be more prosperous economically, they'll also be more rid of opioids that are currently rampant in the United States. So clearly both sides seeing things very differently. There is scheduled to be a meeting tomorrow in the United States, but at this stage it looks like the government shutdown shows no signs of ending.
Absolutely. With these signs, you can clearly figure out if the shutdown is actually coming to an end or not. Thank you so much, Will, for bringing us all those details and sharing your precious perspective here on World is One.